Okay, we're up to the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Amid Aleph, Masechta Nazir. We're going to finish the fourth parak, B'ezras Hashem, today, and a very, very difficult parak. Very difficult parak, but Hadron Allah, we will B'ezras Hashem get back to it. Hayish Megaleach al Nazirus Aviv. We said a man can go ahead and use the money of his fathers for his own Nazirus. However, Ve'eni Isha Megalechas al Nazirus Aviha, but a woman cannot. So a man can go ahead and use the money, and a woman cannot. Now, what is the way to use the money? Now, the girsa of the Mishnah seems to be mishubish, because Taisus says that, and the Gemara seems to substantiate it in the Amid Beis. So we're going to go with the girsa of Taisus, fellas. We're learning the Mishnah with Taisus' girsa. The Taisus is the third Taisus in the bottom, right? The third is the third. There's the third Taisus in the bottom. What does he want? Rabbi Weiner shows up. He's in there. He wants to say, does anybody want to send regards? I want to tell him. I'm going to say, 1 second. Okay, so we're going to go with the girsa of Taisvis. Let's see Taisvis. Now, there's two possibilities, fellas. He was a Nazir with his father simultaneously, or he was Makabel Naziris after the death of his father. Good? So now, the possibility is the father went ahead, he was a Nazir, he put Moyes Stumois away, he's a Nazir simultaneously, and the father consequently dies, or the father was a Nazir, he put away Stumois money, he died, and then after the tear of the father, then the son was Makabel Naziris. Where do we say the halacha? Where do we say the halacha? Says the Gemara. Yeah. Misha haYehuva Aviv Nazirim. So says Taisus, the girsa is both he and his father were Nazirim simultaneously. The Hifish Aviv Ma'is Nazirusai, and the father separated money for his Naziris. Umeis. Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Yossi, Hari Elu Yipul Nedava, that Ma'is Stumais will go Lunadava. That's the halacha Moshe Sinai. You know why? Because since he was a Nazir simultaneously with his father, he has a chiyuv to bring his own money. The Ezish Megaleach al Naziris Aviv, Aishaya Aviv Nazir, his father was a Nazir. And the father put away money but didn't designate. Umeis and consequently died. V'Oma Harini Nazir al Menashe Galeach al Mois Abba. And the guy says, "I'm a Nazir. I'm asked to go ahead and bring karbonis with my father's money." Zeu shemagaleach al Niris Aviv hachi garsinim beperish kadmoinim. This is the girsa of the previous earlier generations, meaning Taisus had the girsa in our Mishnah. The girsa in our Mishnah is the opposite. The girsa in our Mishnah is Yipul Nedava is when he was Makabel Naziris after his father died, and when can he? When they're simultaneously. Okay, so we have that's not our girsa. Perish Rabbeinu Baruch b'Habisvarim he the Huva Aviv Nazir Megaleach al Ma'is Aviv. But he was alive in the time of his father in Megalech. Okay, so let's go. Let's keep Taisus Gersa. Let's get it straight. According to Taisus, if they were Naziris simultaneously, Rabbi Yossi says that's Yiplun Adava. When can he use his father's money? That if he went ahead, his father separated when he died, and then he was Makabel Naziris. That's the case, guys. Very, very important to get it clear because the Gemara is going to go ahead and go through that. Okay, so that's the Gersa. Says the Gemara, my timer. Now there's machloikis my timer between Taisus and the Rosh. Let's go with the Rosh. My timer megaleach al Naziris Aviv. What's my shna mishtar karbonis damalel the karbonu hu yaitza v'eni yaitza b'karbon aviv. In other words, this money that's designated, in fact, we don't know what it's for, but we do know one thing: it's for karbonis. Whether it's for the chatas or the shlamim or the oil, we don't know, but we know it's for the karbonis of the Naziris, correct? We saw yesterday's daf karbonoi that a person cannot bring the carbon of his father. Why over here is it different? Why is this money not viewed as a carbon? And just like his father had separated karbonis, he's not able to use that. The money as well, since he separated the money, he should not be able to use that. That's the question of the Rosh, the way he learns the my timer. So my timer, what's this different than a carbon that he can't bring, and yet now the money which is designated for karbonis he could bring? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan hilchasihi bin Nazir. It's a halacha bin Nazir. It's halacha ben Nazir, halacha Moshe Sinai. So this is another halacha Moshe Sinai that the Yiflin Adava, halacha Moshe Sinai that a father can be mother his son as a Nazir, and this is the third halacha Moshe Sinai recited by Rabbi Yochanan. That what again it was sequence. The first halacha Moshe Sinai was Mois lived in a dava. The second one was the father can make his son into a Nazir, and the third one is that what now if the father leaves over the money and the son goes ahead and it's makabel naziris, he could use the money despite the fact that it's a person says karbano, and if he left over karbanis, he would not be able to bring them. So three halacha Moshe Sinai. So that's glad. Now the Gemara here is very now pshita. How can you say pshita on halacha Moshe Sinai? In other words, obviously, guys, the halacha Moshe Sinai usually tells you the svar is not like that, but the halacha Moshe Sinai is that it's different, correct? So pshita is not going back on what we just said. Again, another example of lashon naziris mishuna, how the lashon of naziris in Talmud Bavli wasn't edited well, and therefore it's similar to Nedarim, even though it's a little better than Nedarim, but not much. That sometimes the Gemara just not seeing the fact that you guys have seen thousands of blot Gemara. You should by now we know that this is not pshita is something that was obvious. If it's halacha Moshe Sinai, it can't be obvious. Guys, you with me, right? In other words, I needed that halacha to tell me something that you would know. So actually say pshita. That seems to be counterintuitive. Okay, so the pshita over here, according to the Rosh, is going on. Why it's posted that a bas cannot go ahead and be megaleach on the money of the father. That a bas cannot be megaleach on the money of a father. Good. So in other words, let's get Rabbi Rosenzweig here. Okay, Rabbi Roy, so I'm going to get you up to speed quickly. Okay, listen up fast. We're in the Gemara on Daf Lamed Amud Aleph. We did the Mishnah. The Mishnah had stated that if a person goes ahead and and his father goes ahead and separates his money, stumais. Consequently, the father dies. In that case, the son will be able to use the money. If the son was simultaneously a nazir with him, like Rabbi Yossi, you would not be able to use the money, right? But when this Rabbi Yossi said you could use the money if he's makabel naziris after the father died. Fred the Gemara Kasha, why is this different than karbanoi? If we said yesterday he can't use the karbanis of his father, why could he use the money of the father? Says the Gemara, it's halacha Moshe Sinai. It's halacha Moshe Sinai to use the money of the father. Now the Mishnah had also said that a woman who's in a zero cannot use that money. A woman who's in the zero cannot use that money. Says the Gemara, pshita, she's not yoirish her father. Where does she have money from? Right? Pshita, she's not yoirish the father. So that's the way the Gemara we read the Gemara now. Let's start it again. My timer, what's the reason, according to the Rosh, we're learning the Rosh. My timer, what's the reason that a son could go ahead and use the father's money? We don't say it's like a carbon that he can't. Pshita, that a girl can't use the father's money. Again, classic case of Lashon Nedarim Mishuna, guys, right? Pshita, that a whole different halacha that the daughter can't. Says Gemara, my lememra. Says Gemara, the ben yorish asaviv bas loy. So that's the pshita. So in other words, that since the bas doesn't inherit the father, how could she use the money for naziris? It's not hers. So the Gemara says tzricha the lesle elabas. In other words, she's the only game in town, and she would inherit. So now the tema Yorshin Gemirila. Yorshin, we have that the halacha Moshe Sinai is not a Yudin a Naziris Dikadin, it's a Yerusha Dikadin. In other words, that she inherits the money, and now you can go ahead and do whatever you want with it. So I might think that she inherits it, and therefore what? She could use the money to bring a carbon. Kamash Malon, Hilch Alacha, that no, it's not a din in Yerusha. Kamash Malon, it's a din in Alacha Moshe Sinai, that unique to the son and not the daughter. So even though the daughter would inherit the money, she still can't use it. Even in other words, you would have thought that the halacha Moshe Sinai is that you inherit the money, and you inherit the money. What you have a havamina if you inherit the money, you could use it. Kamashmal halacha that no, you're limited. Even if you have the money that the father put aside, the girl would not be able to use it for naziris. Now, iboilahu. The Mishnah only stated one din, guys. If you look at the Mishnah, let's again look at Taisvis. That Taisvis on Lamed. Again, the Taisvis on Lamed is, I don't want to mix you up with Ger Sais. So therefore, look at the Taisvis on Lamed. Ha'ish megalech al naziris aviv ein ish megalechas keitzad misha yuhu aviv nazirim. They're both nazirim. The hifish of mois and Zirusai, who mace, Rabbi Yossi Yomer, Hari Elu Yiplin Adava. Rabbi Yossi says that what? This money is used in Adava. Why? Because since they were simultaneously Nazirim, then what? They don't use the money. When they use the money? When he was Kabbalah Naziris after the death of his father. The Gemara assumes that when it says Rabbi Yossi Yomer, there's somebody else. It's Rabbi Yossi who says this, but there's somebody else. Who's that somebody else? That's the Chachamim. Now, the Chachamim, they can argue or not. In other words, the Chachamim could say that what? That even when they're both Nazirim, then what? Then he would be able to bring the carbon, using the money for korbanos, and they argue Rabbi Yossi in the Reisha, or they agree Rabbi Yossi in the Reisha and argue on the Seifa, and they say the Seifa not, or they argue across the board, meaning according to the Chachamim, you always can go ahead and use your father's money, whether you were Nazir after his death, and even if you were Nazir, simultaneously you could bring it. And that's the Gemara is going to be poished, guys. The Gemara is going to be poished like the Chachamim. You could always use the money, whether you were afterwards and even simultaneously. That's the way that we need to poished the Shaila. See, Boilu, following Shaila. Pligi Rabbon Alecha de Rabbi Yossi, Alei Pligi. Do they argue or not? The Imtim Salema Pligi, if they do argue, are Reisha. Do they argue on the Reisha that the Sipnul and the Dava? That in that case they said, when simultaneously they argue and said that no, even simultaneously you could use the money, or they're arguing on the Sefer that you said the son could use the money, and they're saying that the son cannot use the money in that case. In other words, they would say you can only use it simultaneously, but you can't use it when you're not simultaneously, when afterwards. Okay, Tashma, guys, we're going to be poished that across the board, that they argue on the Reisha. The Reisha, guys, what's the Reisha? Simultaneously, right? You can't use it. They're going to argue and say simultaneously you could use it, and Kol Shekei, when it's not simultaneously, you could use it. Tashma, Ketzad Amru Va'ish Megaleach al Naziris Aviv. What's the case that the son can be Megaleach Naziris Aviv? And this is why we went with Taisus Gersa, guys. Look at this brisa, and this is why we went with Taisus Gersa. Misha Haya Aviv Nazir, some whose father was a Nazir, Vehifish Aviv Mois L'Nazirusai, and then the father separated the money, umeis, and the father consequently died. V'amar. Then he said, "Harini Nazir, al menashe galeach al mais aviv, zeu shmagaleach al mais aviv." Avo misha haya hu v'aviv nazirim. If they were both nazirim, the hifish avos mois nazirusai umeis hari elu yiplin adava di Rabbi Yossi. So again, this is why I went with Taisus Gersa, fellas. If you look at the Mishnah, it's the opposite. So again, what's the Gersa over here? The Gersa is when can the son use the money? If he's Makabel Naziris after the death of the father. But if they were simultaneously, then he couldn't. This is the opinion of who? Of Rabbi Yossi. However, Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda Amru, they're all of the opinion, Zehu Shmegalech al Mois Aviv. This is the case with Megalech al Mois Aviv, meaning when the fathers simultaneously, when they were Nazirim, they could be Megaleach. And Kol Shekei when what? Kol Shekei when they weren't. So across the board, you will have the. Let's see Taisus for a second. Toshma, second Taisus. Toshma da Reisha Pligi. The Reisha, again, the Reisha that stated that simultaneously it's not. They argue and say simultaneously you could, right? The Reisha Pligi, the Tanya, Ketzad Amru, Ish Megaleach al Mois Aviv, Misha Yaviv Nazir, Fifish Aviv Mois, Lemzirusai, Umeis, V'Amareni Nazir, Al Nash Galeach Mois Aviv. That's the case with according to Rabbi Yossi, only after the death of the father. Aval Misha Hayahuva Aviv Nazirim simultaneously, Fifish Aviv Mois, Lemzirusai, Umeis, Hariyah Lipman David Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Lazar, Reishua, Oimrim, Zeu Shmegaleach al Naziris Aviv. This is the case in Megaleach and the Naziris Aviv. Ubrov Svarim he mishubish. In most of the Svarim, the text is corrupt. So therefore, we can push the Shaila that what? We push the Shaila that they argue on the Reisha. Okay, let's do it outside. A little complicated, guys. One more time outside. What did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah said simultaneously not, after death, yes. That's what Rabbi Yossi said. Comes along that we want to know that there's a Rabbi Yossi's talking about the Chachamim. Do they argue Rabbi Yossi or not? And if they argue, where are they arguing? Are they arguing on case number one or case number two? We're being pushed, they argue on case number one. What's case number one? Simultaneously not. They're arguing simultaneously, yes. If they say simultaneously, yes, you can use the money, then certainly they would say after death you could use the money. So they're arguing across the board. Good, very good. Now, a series of questions, funny questions. Boy Rabbi, yesh lo shtei bonim, Nazirim. The father has two sons on Nazirim. So Mahu, Hilchasa Gemiri law, that called the Chodem Migaleach, like the din of whoever gets there first. In other words, he leaves money, right? And it doesn't work with Torah's Yerusha. So whoever, let's say he left $500 for Kabbanis. So whoever gets there first takes the 500, or no, it's 250 and 250. It's then Yerusha, and they can use it partially for the Kabbanis. Or why it says in the Gemara, Dilma Yerusha Gamirila Upal Gahave, and they only get half. So in other words, this din, we know that Allah Sinai states that they're able to. Good. The question is the divvy up of the money. Do we say that no, the money goes to one person, or no? It's a classic case Yerusha. Now, if you're going to tell me it's a classic case Yerusha, boy Rava, and not Rabbi, boy Rava, Bicharu Pashit Mai. You're going to tell me it's the case of Yerusha, guys. What happens with Yerusha? What happens? So therefore, each one will get a half. What about a Bechor? And what about a Bechor and a Pashit? Now we know a Bechor gets Pishnayim, and a Pashit gets what? Regular. Good. So you're going to divide it up. Let's say you had $100. You're going to divide up three. You're going to divide up 33 and a third, 33 and a third, 33 and a third, and he's going to take 66 and a third. Right? That's the way it works. So now, if you tell me it's Din Yerusha, what would you say by Bechor, and what would you say by what? By Pashit. Now, what's the Shaila, guys? If you tell me it's Din Yerusha, so Pashit that if the father left over, whatever he left over, the husband he should get 2/3. So again, Lashon Nedar Mishana. Usually the Imtim Saloima comes first. Here we're going to have the Imtim Saloima second. And here's the lumdus, guys. The Imtim Saloima is the following. Is this a classic case of Yerusha? And therefore, it's a din in Chulin, and he gets 2/3. Or since the money is Hegdish, the father is really being machzik in it. We all know that a Bechor only gets Pishnayim in what the father is machzik in the time of his death. Right? Not something that can come later on, not something that can be roy. Here, the father's not really being machzik in it. It's in his rishus. However, it's not his because he can't use it whatever he wants. So maybe over here, even though it's usually it's a din of Yerusha, maybe Yerusha of Hegdish might be a little different, and therefore it would be half and half rather than 2/3 and a third. That's the explanation of Rav's explanation. Kasha. Good. So the Imtim Saloimar is saying maybe the Yerusha is only by Chulin, but by Hegdish, since he's not holding on to it, there would not be a din of Bechor, or no. That's the Shaila according to Rava, but the Imtim Saloima comes afterwards. This is the way the Rosh explains the Gemara. So boy Rava, Bechoru Pashit Mai, Hilchasa Gemiri Lon, the Hilkach Loi Boy Giluchi Lafon Mai Shakel. Right, then you don't have to go ahead according to what it takes, right? And therefore, half and half. Dilma Yerushahi, the Chehechi, the Shakel Pishnayim, Hachi Megaleach. Just like by Yerusha, he takes Pishnayim, he'll get 2/3. Now, the Imtim Saloima is explaining the Shaila, guys. Here, the Imtim Saloima is explaining why you'd have a Shaila. We just were Poisha Pashtas, it's Yerusha, right? In other words, Rabbi had that Shaila. We weren't Poisha the Shaila, but L'chayra, what's Rava adding to Rabbi's Shaila? Why would, in other words, it should depend on that. If there's a din Yerusha, he gets Pishnayim. If there's no din Yerusha, he doesn't, right? In other words, so L'chayra, what's he adding? So the Imtim Saloima is explaining why Rabbi's Shaila would still be in vogue after Rabbi's Shaila. Imtim Saloima Yerusha, right? Ulafum the Shakel Megaleach. Ubechulin hu de islay pishnayim, aval behegdish loy. Now, why behegdish not? Because this will not be considered bechol sheyimatz loy. The blushing of the pasuk is anything that's found by him, the charbetz pishnayim. This is not found by him because it's what it's designated for a carbon. Idil makivin the kani giluach leishna. Right? There's no difference. Maybe since he requires it for giluach, it would be no difference, and you get 2/3. So those are the two shilas. One is a din half and half, it's din called the Olam Gavar, whoever gets there first, and or din Yerusha, you get half and half. And if you can tell me it's the din Yerusha, I still have another shaila. In the din Yerusha, how do we view the kabbanis? Do we view the kabbanis as what as pashit, or do we view it as kol hashem yimatzi? In other words, clear cut half and half? Well, no. Do we say he'll get, and why? Because maybe it's not considered tachas the hands asher yimatzi loy. It's not found in the hands of the father since it's designated for kabbanis, and then he will get bishnayim. But Dilma, no, maybe not. Two more shilas. Aviv nazar olam, who nazar stam. Now he's a nazar olam. Now this whole Gemara flows well according to the Chachamim. That's simultaneously, right? According to Rabbi Yossi, it would have to be he's makabel to be his father was a nazar olam, and again his father's a nazar olam. He cuts his hair once a year, brings kabbanis, and then goes back to it. So let's say his father set aside the money for kabbanis, for the yearly shearing, right? SCSHEA, right? The yearly shearing, and then the son gets a naziris, a regular naziris. Could he use the kabbanis there? Says the Gemara, Aviv nazar olam v'hu nazar stam, or Aviv nazar stam v'hu nazar olam. Mai ki gamir in hilchas. When the Salach HaMishkinei stated that's b'stam naziris, where they're both the same. I don't malishna. Maybe there's no difference. Either eating naziris tahira, and if you're going to tell me there's no difference, and maybe they're both nazirim that are tar. But boy, Rav Ashi, Aviv nazar tamei, and the father set aside money for his chatas ha'oif, his oilas ha'oif, and his asham. For who nazar tahir, and he needs a chatas oil and shlamim. Right? Aviv nazar tahir, who nazar tamei. Mai, would he be able to use the funds over there? To what extent do we say that Allah Mishmiyan extends to? And the Gemara concludes and says, Teku, that will remain what? A question to be answered. Hajj Alecha Mishamar, Hajj Alecha Mishamar, Hajj Alecha Mishamar. We thank everyone for listening, and we wish everyone a great